a senior researcher at the American Institute for Research. Many of you met Amanda when we were able to spend some time with you in the fall in Reno. And as you could tell then, and as I'm about to share now, she has extensive expertise in adult education, team coaching, training development, and technical assistance delivery. She leads the technical assistance delivery and professional development for programs throughout the country, and she works on federally as well as privately funded projects. Prior to Amanda's work with AIR, she was an instructor herself. She provided evidence-based instruction to adult learners at all levels, and she was also an administrator at a community-based organization. Amanda has great background experience as well as educational experience. She has a master's in education with a focus on curriculum and instruction, reading and literacy from the George Washington University. And we are very fortunate to have her share a great deal of that expertise around using data for classroom improvement in this webinar. So for the next 90 minutes or so, you'll hear from Amanda. And Amanda, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Cherise. Can everyone hear me? Please just put a yes in the chat pod. I see typing. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much. And Cherise, thank you for that lovely introduction. I feel like that's a lot to follow up with. But again, thank you so much for joining the webinar today. And I really want to reinforce the fact that I was, in fact, a classroom teacher and an adult education program administrator. So the things that I'm sharing with you today, not only are they evidence-based, but they are practices that I engaged in for many years. So I'm happy to share some of my own personal stories with you, and we'll ask you throughout to share some of your ideas, your stories, and your questions as we move through the webinar. Let's just do a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to look at the big picture of data by providing an overview of what data is, how data can be used, and how data is currently used. And we'll talk through some of the most common barriers to using data. And of course, as we talk about barriers, we always want to be solution focused. So we're going to talk about some of those solutions. We're going to look at what data quality is, and finally we'll spend a chunk of our time together this evening, I'm on the East Coast, so or your afternoon, working through understanding and reviewing your own classroom data. And of course, I'll share some next steps, a brief assignment for an in-person training. And I just want to say up front, if you're not able to attend the training, that's fine. Please stay on the line. Please continue to participate. And the activity that I share at the end is something that you can take back to your program and still use as a practice activity. So data overview. We're educators. We all believe and know that all students, whether they're young or adults, deserve a great education, and one that allows them the opportunities for learning the necessary skills they need to become knowledgeable and skilled contributors to society, to increase their employment, increase access to employment. And we know that every adult student has a unique background, they have unique strengths and unique paths. So all of us who have a stake in education need the right data in the right format and at the right time to serve our students along these unique journeys. We live in a data-driven world, and think about your day-to-day experiences and how heavily steeped you are in data collection. When I was kind of thinking through this presentation and what I wanted to say, I started to think about, okay, where do I see data? I see data in toothpaste commercials. I see a collection of data after going through security at the airport, which is very strange. When I go to the gym and I'm leaving, they're asking me how my experience is and asking me to hit a button so they can collect my data. My email inbox is flooded with requests to complete surveys, whether it be about the banking that I just did online or a travel site I visited or something that I purchased on Amazon. just no matter where you go, someone is either presenting data to you or asking you to contribute to their own data collection. So this is like a huge mindset over the past, with 20, 30 years or so. And it is especially a huge contrast when we think about the beginning of the national reporting system. And Larry Condelli is on the phone, and I'm sure he could tell you stories for hours and hours about the kind of pushback he got from the field around this structured and standardized data collection. But now it's accepted as part of our day-to-day activities that we participate in. And those of us in adult education now are much more accepting and open to the data collection and sharing process. What's really cool about collecting data is that we're collecting it not only at the classroom, the program, and the state level, but also nationally. And so this is helping to move from a more process-defined organization to a data-driven organization. And again, when we think about publicly funded services, the data focus is stronger, but it's exceptional when we're talking about education, and adult education is no different. So this goes far beyond kind of program control, and it really begins with a legislative mandate. Recently, WIOA was passed, and so think about the implications that that has had on your state and on your programs. There are reporting requirements at the national and state level that present to you as performance and reporting requirements. So these would include things like test scores, outcomes, and value-added models. But most importantly for you, all of this data collection can help you with your classroom improvement. So what is the importance of data? On the last slide, I mentioned that data was everywhere, and it could help you with your classroom improvement. But I first really want to take a big picture look at why data are so important in adult education. First and foremost, it's critical to federal accountability. We tend to think of data collection is for the purposes of submitting to OCTAE, but it goes even bigger than that, because every year federal agencies have to present data to show that the programs they fund are effective. And so the data collected at the classroom level, at that intake level, feeds into your program, your state, and then your national OCTAE, who is then going to present all of that data to show how fantastic adult education is. And so all of this data supports funding at all the different levels, and it also helps to maintain unique program identities. The data collected all serve a purpose, and it allows for programs to demonstrate that they've met state and federal performance standards. In our data-driven world, and I'm of course thinking of WIOA as it relates to all of us, states increasingly need to evaluate program effectiveness at all levels. So this means that states must use data in order to identify policies and programs that work. So think about in your program all of the combined classroom data that is put together to then demonstrate your program effectiveness. So the data that you collect and report supports claims of success, such as high attendance, persistence, outcome attainment, but it can also, as we've mentioned, identify areas that need improvement. State programs and also classes can use this to make data-based decisions. Change in and of itself can be difficult, but knowing that a change is based on data and not instinct or personal program director preference supports the need for that change. And this is true for your use as a classroom teacher. So I just did a kind of quick overview, big picture of what data is, what it is, and why it's important. So I just kind of want to pause here for a second before we move on to uses of data and ask if you have any questions or comments that you want to put in the chat pod. All right, I don't see any questions or comments, so I'm going to move on. So your state collects data based on perhaps some state-specific goals or interests, but all of our federally funded programs collect and report consistent data, and so you would be familiar with this through the NRS tables. And so this is used at the federal level to determine national progress towards improving literacy and skills of adults that are being served. The data is reviewed and analyzed to identify national and state trends. And then the trends are used to determine what types of national research and professional development are needed to support state and local programs. So if you've ever been involved in any of the AEPD initiatives, such as Open Educational Resources for adults in STEM, the College and Career Readiness Standards, these were not selected out of the blue. They were selected and determined based on national data that determined where either trends were going or what type of support teachers and students needed within adult education. At the federal level, the data is also used to monitor program outcomes and data quality. And so each year, AEPD negotiates performance targets with states to determine what percentage of students should be making EFL gains, for example. And so this decision trickles down to you as the classroom teacher, and it can help kind of explain the expectations from your program director. Each year, those expectations get higher and higher, and that's of course in the vein of continuous improvement. And then AEPD uses that data that's submitted to evaluate state performance each year. And I'm not sure if you're aware of this or not, but adult education, and this is through the National Reporting System, submits a report to Congress every year. And this report includes a summary of all relevant data points across the country in adult education. This includes EFL gains, GED, number of students, and then of course a breakdown of who those students are, etc. And we all know that Congress has the power to support adult education funding, and this report and all of the data that's included in it may help to inform them, not only about their decisions, but also to help increase their knowledge of adult education. And so these reports to Congress are housed on the NRS website if you're interested. So how do states use data? First, states are going to use data to help inform what needs to be improved in instruction. So if they're looking at data across the state and data shows that, for example, the adult basic education population is achieving low MSG rates, then the state knows that professional development is needed in order to support the teachers of those students so the state can reach its goal, but really key and most importantly so that the students can reach their goals in achieving progression in their literacy, math, digital literacy skills, etc. States also use data to measure program success and effectiveness. So how does Nevada know if your program is successful? How do they know if it's effective? How do they know if the desired outcome, student success, is being achieved? And they do this all through data. So if your program is successful, the data will show it. States also use data to identify what is making a difference. So there may have been an example where states looked at data, noticed a trend that evening classes were producing higher persistence rates and stronger gains. So maybe using that data, there was a policy created that said, your program needs to offer, morning and evening classes, but at least 60% of your classes should be during the evening. And then they can look at that data based on the policy and say, was this effective? Did this have the intended outcome? And then finally, one of my favorite things to do with data and also in the classroom as a teacher is to help identify root problems, such as poor retention, low educational gains, or low transition. So we go from the national to the state and now to the local. So how do your local programs, so this is a program that you're teaching through use data. And programs can typically do the same thing that states do with the data, but just within a smaller context of the program. So last week, as Sharice mentioned, Larry facilitated a very similar webinar to this for your administrators. And by looking at program level data, your administrators can make the data-driven decisions that are going to suggest areas for improvement in instruction, measure the program success, identify what's making a difference, pulling out and identifying which of the classrooms are getting the results that are wanted and which are not, in retaining students and showing MSGs, and then therefore making plans to support those classrooms. And again, helping to identify root problems. Now the good stuff. Classroom uses of data. So I'm definitely going to be asking for some interaction on this part using the chat. So please get ready to share your thoughts and experiences and questions. So Classroom has many uses for data. We're going to share a couple, talk about a couple, and then find out what else you've done with your classroom data. So tracking student progress, identifying if your own personal instruction is effective, examining attendance by student, and helping to identify students needing assistance. So that's a few things that you can do with your data. And you probably collect a lot of data, even if you're calling it something else. I remember having my clipboard, my reflection journal after my classes that I would write down all of my notes, and that is all data. So you're collecting diagnostic data, formative data, summative data. We're really going to focus kind of on that summative and standardized data, but how you use that and what we share here can transfer to how you use your diagnostic and formative data as well. Can do is to track individual student progress with your data. Has everyone who needs testing received testing? Have they received their pre-test? Is it time for them to take their post-test? Do they have sufficient amount of time in the classroom and receiving instruction to achieve an MSG, a measurable skill gain? You can also use the data to share testing results with students individually. Now, kind of the philosophy and the approaches to doing this vary, but I just want to talk about the data in the conversation here. So you can talk to a student about their gains from their pre to the post. You can talk to your student about what that means moving forward. What are some obtainable, realistic goals for each of them to work towards before the next test? And you can do this through individual student counseling, conferences, excuse me, or you can present it as a data table if you're doing some math in your classroom, and to talk about it as a whole group without individual student names, of course. But tracking student progress is one way for you as classroom teachers to use your data. Anything else when you think about tracking student data, testing, scores, and MSG that you have used your data for? I'm just going to pause for a minute, and if you have any experiences you want to share in the chat pod, please do so. Okay, I see TMCC is typing, so I'm going to give them a moment so we can read what it is they've done with their data around tracking student progress. Great, so TMCC is saying that in addition to what's on the screen, that we also provide reports to all of the teachers, and you look at progress over time. And that's a great contribution to this conversation. Thank you. It's not only about in the moment, but it's also about over time and what you can do with your data over time. PMCC is also looking at the impact of new educational interventions, right? How do you know if it's working? Because these interventions take time, they take effort, they take resources. So making sure you use your data to determine how well they are working or not. And Ken is sharing that he has a new pre-class report for teachers at the beginning of class, progress over lifetime hours, hours since last test. Oh, a pre-class report, Ken, is awesome, and I think that that would have helped me as an instructor prepare before my class starts. Thank you. Teacher effects, demographics of students, yes, absolutely. Thank you all for contributing. Let's move on to the next. And again, after we talk about the next bullet, I'm going to ask you to share. So finding out if your instruction is effective, and TMCC kind of alluded to this when they talked about the interventions, right? So is the intervention effective? You can also use data to find out if your instruction is effective. Are students achieving the goals, such as passing that GED, increasing in ESL, gaining those math skills, being accepted into a credentialing program, right? These are all of the kind of goals and things that we're tracking. And you can track it as teachers by looking at your data. And when you're tracking if the instruction is effective, you can also look at it from the perspective of using the data to decide how to group students and how to differentiate within your class. So when you're getting the standardized kind of test data, and it's revealing how your students performed, we know that our classes, no matter how hard we try, are always multi-level. And using that kind of standardized test data can help inform how you choose to group your students, how you choose to organize your class, and how you differentiate for individuals. If you have a large number of students who, say, have advanced in your evening class, but a large number of students in your morning class, which is the same level, the same curriculum, are not making gains, this can just provide some insight to you as the instructor as to why the evening class is moving more quickly and more deeply through the content. And then you can go ahead and adjust the learning and support accordingly for the morning class. Dig a little deeper and be able to find out what that root cause is. So the data can help you, again, support your students in their access to the materials. So before we move on to the third bullet, I want to ask you, how have you used data to identify if your instruction is effective? And I'm just going to pause for a moment and give you a chance to share what you've done. I see Ken's typing, and Cecilia. So I'm just going to pause a moment as we wait for their comments. And Ken says, find quantity of hours for level gains. What is the sweet spot? Very good. All right. Another thing that we can do as teachers with our classroom data is you can examine attendance by student, and then you and your program can make decisions accordingly. We talked about student conferences earlier, and I don't know what your regular practices are, but you can use some of this attendance data to either meet one-on-one with the student or support them before and after class. So if a student is missing or absent for, what seems like a third of the class period, you can use that data to inform a conversation with the student to find out what's going on. And maybe it's about the timing. Maybe a new job was offered or their schedule switched and they don't want to leave class, but they're not able to attend. So having these conversations can help you support them in either moving them to another class or sharing some supplemental materials. Because we do know that attendance and persistence is also going to impact achievement. So students who are consistently absent means that they're not getting all the instruction they need. And I see some ideas coming through in the chat. So be able to identify students with special learning needs. And yeah, data is certainly a beginning point for being able to identify students who need specific support or additional diagnostic testing to find out if they're learning special learning needs. Yes, our students who stop out regularly. And when I read that, I could see lots of students' faces pop into my head from my teaching time. But yes, looking at the attendance data, and this is especially going to support those students when they come back after stopping out, and you can have those conversations with them about why are they stopping out, what can you do as a program and as a classroom to support them. And also, like you said, issues with student persistence, right? So what's going on? The data, especially when we're talking about attendance, is opening up the door for conversation to finding out more about what's going on outside of the classroom and how you can support them. Thank you all so much for sharing these. Keep them coming. We're going to talk about one more point before we move on. So as classroom teachers, you can also use your data to help identify students needing assistance by reviewing and analyzing that data. If you examine the data over time and you notice students aren't progressing, you can support them by providing excuse me, some additional resources, maybe suggest a tutor, coming back to what TMCC shared. Maybe you've identified them as someone needing some diagnostic assessment to see if there's something else going on that's imposing a barrier to their learning and their growth. And then get curious, right? What are some of the contradictions that you see? I think we all have students in our class who master the content in the classroom setting. They master those strategies and those skills. And then when they take a test, they don't do well at all. And that's data that we can use. Maybe they're a nervous test taker. Maybe it's low motivation in the sense that maybe no one shared their test scores with them or the resulting levels from them. They don't know what the test is for, what it's about, what it means, how it applies to their real life, right? We all know adults are highly motivated when it comes to learning about things they can apply immediately. And so maybe they don't see the importance. And so maybe that helps you to support either the student or the class with a pep talk, an informational talk before the test, some test-taking strategies, some anxiety-reducing practices that they can engage in when taking those tests. And so, of course, the data can help inform those individual or whole group conversations. Especially when we are curious about those contradictions and we can take some action. So again, TMCC has already shared some of their ideas about how data can help them identify students needing assistance. I'd love to hear from others. What else or how else have you used data to help identify students needing assistance? And again, I'm just going to pause and give you a moment to use the chat pod and share your stories. Okay, I don't see anybody typing, but also, are there any kind of questions or comments about the uses of data, whether that be at the federal, state program, or classroom level, before we move on to talk about some barriers in using data? Okay, I don't see anybody typing, so I'm going to move on, but if something comes to mind, please use the chat pod, and we're all watching it and we'll be able to respond. Let's talk about overcoming barriers to data use. Data can be scary, and especially as a teacher, we often see progress in our students that is not necessarily represented in the NRS data, and this in and of itself can lead to barriers, whether that's conscious or not, to collecting and using data effectively. I know, especially when I was a new teacher, I was terrified at the idea that people would be looking at my classroom data, and would that mean I would still have a job, or would my students still be allowed to come back? It was nerve-wracking to think about that. So barriers to data use come kind of in three main pockets or topic areas, right? We have our fears, we have our norms, and then we have our structural barriers. So when we talk about fears, and I just kind of shared my old fears with you, that fear data can make our classroom look bad. We just talked about some of those contradictions and some of the students who we would assume would progress, not progressing. Again, whether it be a bad day, test anxiety, what have you. But thinking, okay, but that's the official number, but that's going to make my classroom look bad even though I see the success right in front of me. There's fear that the data will be used out of context to perhaps hurt our classroom. And also there's a fear that data is poor quality. Do you experience kind of one or more of these? You can raise your hand or throw a yes in the chat pod. I know for sure, like I said, when I was a new teacher, especially those first two were all consuming. Anyone else? See some folks typing. Well, that's great. CMCC doesn't share those concerns. That's fabulous. So while Mary's typing, I'm just going to talk about norms. So some programs do not have a data use culture. Some perceive it to be a waste of time, and that thinking about data only for the purposes and uses of reporting to the state or the federal government. And also, there can be a lack of understanding of how to use data, particularly if we as classroom teachers are trained in a content area or education, and we're not trained into how to use data. It can just be a simple lack of understanding that can cause this barrier to effectively using data to improve our instruction, our students' experiences, and so forth. And so Mary says, game scores help me more in the classroom than CASAS does. It gives better data for me in the classroom. Great. And says, excuse me, not in the required form, online programs, terrible interface. Yeah, that terrible interface, Ken, I think you're talking about the data system, and that can be part of that structural barrier piece for sure. Because the structural barrier is having an actual lack of access to the data. You can't do anything with the data if you don't have access to it. If it's not in the form you need. So if you're getting program data, you can't look at it in terms of how it relates to your classroom, and how you could make improvements for your students. If it's not current, so if you're receiving data twice a year instead of every month or being able to access it yourself, that's going to interfere with your ability to use it effectively. And of course, a lack of time and resources. Time and resources is huge. And Ken says lack of time to teach teachers. Absolutely. So keep those comments coming. I'm going to keep taking a look. So, while there are these fears, norms, and structural barriers that exist in some form or another, or in combination with each other, that impede on the effective use of data, there is a solution. There are multiple solutions, and of course, each solution will vary according to program and classroom. But like any type of change, it's going to take some time, but the valuable information that we can all get about our students and use it to support their growth and your instruction is totally worth it. And there are three pockets or areas that programs and classrooms can focus on to overcome the barriers of fear, those data use norms and structural issues. So before we talk about these, you may be wondering, why in a webinar for teachers are we talking about program needs? And the reason is that, you're part of the change and you can be an advocate for and serve as a data champion. So these are things that you can talk to about with your administrator and with other teachers. So technical systems. So this is your database. This is your allowable access to data and your data quality. So if you don't have access to the data, you just can't use it. We know this. If the data is secondary, so if it's through a state or a third party, or if it is direct. In the technical system, what is the time frame that or what is the policy rather of entering data, including attendance, test scores, intake information, and then because it has to be current for you to be able to do anything with it. And then, of course, the reporting capabilities. What are the pre-programmed tables that you can access? What are the pre-programmed information that you can access? Then we move to leadership and collaboration. And leadership is going to support the structures for you to be able to access the data and learn how to use the data. Because do you have staff with clear data collection responsibilities, or is it everyone's responsibility? Are there clear definitions and understanding of what the measures and the categories are and why you're collecting them? Right? Information about the why is very important. Those established procedures and standards for what types of forms are you using, how are you submitting data, and to whom. And of course, like Ken mentioned, this ongoing staff training. Teachers need to be supported in policy as well as data use itself. So we have a few comments in here I just want to touch on. So Nancy said the timeliness of the data also means more time needed to review. And we're already tight on time for students, so lack of time gets worse. And yes, Nancy, I completely understand that. And Ken agrees. And TMCC shares that attendance is due weekly by noon, and students that are not in compliance are referred to our program coordinator. Right, so that sounds like you've got the technical system piece, working with the leadership and collaboration that is then going to move into that people factor, TMCC. So it sounds and looks like for this particular data point, attendance, that all of these pieces are working in harmony to achieve the results that you want to achieve. That's awesome. And then, of course, we have people. Who's involved? Do the people have the skills needed? Do they have the attitude and the motivation to use the data. This is really stems and is encouraged by state leadership and support, right? So leading by example. Is the state using the data? Is your program using its data to make database decisions? Are there staff opportunities for staff collaboration and communities of practice around using data at all different levels? How are people being oriented to and helping them to build support for those technical systems and the policies? And the data used on a regular basis to discuss results and solutions. So some of the thoughts you'll see on the screen is really connected to that people factor, right? And I will say I've either said one of these or heard a fellow teacher say one of these at some point. So, you know, I don't have time to do this. What does it matter? Nobody's really paying attention, or you know, I don't know what goes in this area of the report. The student's handwriting isn't clear, or I didn't quite understand, so I'll just make it up. You know, we have good data. I don't need to check it, or I forgot to collect this. It's just one time. It doesn't matter. I won't go back to it. You know, these are all of the kind of people factors that we need to be aware of and provide that training and support so people and teachers can access that data. Can you talk about data quality? And so, you know, we can collect all of the data in the world. If it's not high quality data, then our database decisions are not going to be based on the facts or the real situation. It's not going to be as effective. I'm going to switch slides here, and you're going to see 31 different possible descriptions of high quality. What I'd like you to do is take a look at these, pick one, and write down what it represents to you. So think about, you know, it doesn't have to be about education data, but think about the quality of different types of things and services and places you access. Select one of those words and write it down and what it represents to you. I see multiple people are typing, so I'm just going to pause for a moment as you type. We've got accurate, reliable.
And I see folks typing in one chat, your chat and share your selection here. Chat that's there, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got accurate, reliable, usable. I love this. User-friendly. So this is about user-friendly when we're talking about classroom data is, can I look at it and be able to pull from it? Is it in a format that's helpful to me? Relevant. A lot of accurate and reliable coming up in the chat. The data needs to be of value to me, and so therefore relevant, but the data is no good if it's not accurate. Exactly. Because then what happens is we're making decisions that are based on something that is not true. I still see a few more folks typing, so I'm going to pause just another moment before we move on. Okay, it looks like everyone has stopped typing. The data quality across the board, regardless of where the data is coming from, has certain common characteristics. One is objectivity. Quality data contains information that is accurate and unbiased. So the data are presented clearly and completely, and the sources of the data are well documented. And this is really tying back to a lot of your comments, right? Reliable. It has to be reliable. Integrity. Data with integrity are not compromised, they're not corrupted, they're not falsified in any way. The data has to be, in order for it to be high quality, has to be transparent. So this is about having a clear description of methods. What are your data sources? What are the assumptions? The outcomes, and any related information that allow users to understand the data. In other words, it is clear how you got the data, and it is clear how you interpret the data. The next one is a big one, reproducibility. So quality data can be reproduced by others by using documented methods, assumptions, or data sources. So this means that anyone else doing the same work would end up with the same data results. And then finally, utility, and many of you mentioned this. Quality data are useful. They serve a purpose, and they're available to the people who are supposed to use it. So in the case of our time this afternoon, you, the teachers, have access to it, and it's usable to you. So again, in order for data to be high quality, it has to be objective. It has to have integrity. It needs to be transparent, reproducible, and have utility. So we know data quality is extremely important, and even the smallest data error can have a big impact. So I want you to watch this short video and see what happened when one data point went wrong. And then I want you to think about how an error in data, similar to one that you see in the video, how does that parallel to what the impacts might be in your classroom?
Hi, this is just a quick real-life example of some of the problems that can result from data quality issues. It's a true story. This is Valparaiso, Indiana, and the red cross, the red square, is 1108 Chicago Street, the home of a Mr. Dennis Charnetsky. Now, he says his home is badly made and drafty. It's worth around $121,000.
Okay, it looks
in the county. In particular, it was used to determine the budget. The result was at the end of
give a summary of the video. So a person has their house, they get it appraised, someone adds an extra zero somewhere, and then this individual gets a multi-million-dollar tax bill in the mail. Circling up, 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 what ends up happening is that the county thinks they have a much larger budget than they actually have, and so spending is out of control. There lots of problems occur, and then I believe something like the town ended up suing the individual and wanting him to pay anyway. So it's just that 1 0 that that caused a significant problem in one town. So think about your classroom and think about your data and how might that one tiny error of data quality have an impact either on your classroom or on your program. And go ahead and put it in the chat. And if you weren't able to see the video, just indicate that in the chat so I know to move on and not that you're thinking about your response. Okay, I see a few people typing, so I'm going to wait to see their response. Ken, isn't that true, right? Duplicate ID for student, that happens so often. So what happens is you end up losing an outcome. Okay, Jerry, you couldn't hear. Okay. I'm going to move forward. If you did not all hear it, I don't want to focus too much on it. But again, think about the data quality and think about your classroom. Do you think that your classroom data is high? So Winnie is going to pull up a poll for you. So do you think your classroom data is high quality? And then I want to know your why or why not. So go ahead and type it in the chat if you feel comfortable doing so. Lots of yeses. Okay, great. Looks like everyone is comfortable with the quality of data. Oh, some but not all. Great. Thanks for sharing. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and talk more about understanding your own data for classroom improvement. And I see a few folks are typing in the chat, and please continue to do so. But there's a simple way to look at data and to then identify issues and consider your potential solutions. So first you really need to decide on the topic that you want to examine. So you really want to be able to focus in on what you want to know by forming a question or two. And some examples of what these questions could be are students persisting? Are students making gains after 40 hours of instruction? Then you can look at the data to see if it answers your questions. You know, and for some simpler questions, you may be able to look and easily find an answer, like, you know, are there more males or females in my class, or something like that. But talk to other teachers about what you think you see, or maybe your administrators, and get their views. Are you interpreting the data correctly? And you might need more information in order to make that decision based on your data. And then, of course, plan for some of those improvements. So using your data for improvement, there's really two key areas to examine when we're thinking about classroom data, and that's attendance and measurable skill gains. So are students attending? What types of students and classes, and for how long? So what types of students are attending? What is the topic of your class? And for how long are they persisting? Attendance data can be helpful when you're thinking about contact hours of instruction that the learner receives. You're going to get the intensity and duration of each student's experience, and it can help classroom teachers figure out whether instruction is successful, if content and materials were relevant, if students are motivated, and if students are reaching their goals. And then, of course, measurable skill gains. Are students learning? What is the level of gain overall? And how does it differ by ESL and types of students? And then looking at that information and saying, okay, what can we do with this now? Again, measurable skill gain data can tell us whether the students are progressing, what types of gains are being made for what types of students, which particular site or class or teachers are effective, and contributing to the overall evaluation of program improvement. So when we think about reviewing our classroom data, okay, so we're going to take a look at NRS tables 1, 2, and 3. So table 1 is participant race and gender by educational functioning level. Table 2 is participants by age, ethnicity, and gender. Table 3 is participants by program type and age. So we're going to take a look at each of these, and then we're going to try to make some observations. What do the data tell you? And we're going to answer these questions as we look at each of the individual tables, and we'll have them up so you can see. But what do the data tell you? What do they not tell you? What do you think it means? What other information would you like to understand the data? And what changes do these data suggest? So in your, where is it? In the file pod, you'll see a handout, tables 1 through 3. I'm going to pull it up on the screen, but it's a little bit small on the screen. So I just want to pause and give you a moment to take out and open tables 1 through 3 in the file pod. And I also want to preface by saying these are actual classroom tables from one of my friends in the Northeast. She was kind enough to share her classroom tables with me. So when we look at table 1, what we're looking at is the entering ESL. So when the student first started in your classroom, what was their entering ESL? And it breaks it down by ethnicity and sex. So you'll see in the left-hand column all of the ABE ESL levels. And then on the top, you'll notice Native American, Asian, Black or African American, etc. And then that column is divided into 2 columns that break it down from male to female. So I'd like you to take a moment and either look at the table on your screen or the one that you downloaded and tell me what observations can you make about this classroom. And you can go ahead and type it in the chat pod. Great, Mary's typing. Thanks, Mary. Okay, so Mary says the largest ethnic group is Hispanic, correct? Nancy's typing. What do you see? What does the data tell you? Okay, the class is predominantly Latino female, ESL high level, gender is mostly female. Absolutely. And so Nancy says something interesting here. She says the class is predominantly Latino female and ESL high. So who else is included in the classroom that might be interesting when looking at this table and trying to figure out how it can inform what we're doing or to check for data quality? There are actually 4 ABE students in this class. I'm looking at that, and I really want to know why. Why are there 4 ABE students in a predominantly ESL class? Are they in the appropriate? Are they in the appropriate class? Is this where they're supposed to be? And so we don't know that. We would, of course, have to dig a little bit deeper, but this is what we can find out when we're looking at Table 1, for example. So like many of your comments, you can use Table 1 to compare differences by gender. So there are more females than males. Then asking the question, why might that be? Compare differences by race and ethnicity. Great, so Nancy says, I would guess the ABE students were previously ESL or perhaps are bilingual. Absolutely, that's a great guess. And you can follow up the hypothesis by investigating and having conversations with the students, again, just to make sure that they are actually in the correct class and that they're getting the instruction that they need to meet the goals that they need at the level that they need it. So this is one example of what you can do with NRS Table 1. So let's take a look at Table 2. And again, a larger version is downloadable in that document with Tables 1 through 3. And so I'd like you to do the same thing. Take a look at this and answer one or more of the questions that you see on the screen. What does the data tell you? What doesn't it tell you? Really importantly, what do you think that means? And what changes might the data suggest? And once you've taken a look and thought about it, go ahead and put your responses in the chat pod. All right, we've got a few people typing to share their responses. Okay, I don't see the typing anymore. So when we're looking at Table 2, we're looking at participants by age, ethnicity, and sex. Oh, here Nancy says, I'd like to know how long the students have been in the program. Perhaps the ABE students are friends of the ESL students, and perhaps they can be mentors to them. That's a great thought, Nancy, and as I thinking back about when I was in the program, a lot of the students also became quite attached to some of the teachers and didn't want to leave the teacher's classroom because they felt so safe and they felt comfortable in that learning environment. When we're looking at Table 2, again, we're kind of looking at participants by age, ethnicity, and sex. So is there anything that you notice about the data for the ages of the students in this classroom? So I see TMCC shared particular data that they're interested in collecting, income, specifically as it relates to parent and multi-generational homes, all of that to inform and kind of evaluate their program effectiveness and if they are providing the best resources to them. What else do you notice about this table and the data that is included in it? I see Nancy is typing, and I'm just going to share the thing that stood out to me the most when I was looking at the data in this table, and that's that about half, or just a little bit over half, are over 45. And this is really not typical of the classrooms that we see in adult ed. So that's interesting to me, and I'd want to know what is the curriculum? Is it meeting the students' needs? What is going on that the class is split in this way? Let's look at one more table. This is table 3, and this is participants by program type and age. So again, I know that this is small on the screen, so you have your handout to take a look at. So you'll see on the top, we have the ages, which we kind of just looked at for this classroom on the previous table, but this is divided a little bit differently, and it's demonstrating what program type the students are enrolled in. So is it ABE, ASE, ELA, or English language acquisition, or IET, and then a breakdown of all of those. So take a look at the numbers that you see within this table, and again, tell me what do you see? What does this data tell you? And what does the data suggest, or about changes, or about data quality? You see Mary is typing. Welcome. All thoughts and insights into the data on this table. Right, Mary. So Mary noticed that most of the students are ELA, especially within that 24 to 44 age range, right? And that's typical. Mary, what are the other students identified as? Or anyone? What are the other students identified as? Okay, see a few people typing, so I'm going to pause for a moment as we wait for those responses. Right, ABE, ASE, and ESL Civics. So that to me is a strange mix of students in terms of instructional focus and instructional level. So if I'm looking at this table, I really want to know, why is that? What does that mean for instruction? What does that mean for outcomes? Mary says she also noticed that there are none in the integrated classrooms, and that's a great observation because that might be an opportunity that's being missed. And Nancy says, why are all these students in one class? Right, and that's the point. Nancy, I have no idea, but this is actual classroom data, so I'm glad we're asking these questions and looking at it as classroom teachers, because this is really going to impact how the class is structured, and it's going to make the teacher's difficult very job, but it also has the potential to detract from learning for all students. So this is just some of the information that you can gain when you take a look at your individual classroom tables. And of course, it was a very short amount of time to look at the table, so you could spend a lot more time and of course have conversations with other teachers or program administrators to do a deeper dive. But really all in the vein of looking at, are the data credible and do you trust it? Look at averages. How can averages support decisions and help you identify trends. What's the variation? So what are the ranges among groups? And of course, what are the measures compared to other groups? And Larry says it could just be errors, data quality problem, right? And as we learned, or some of us did, or some of us will after the webinar looking at the video, those data errors can really have a gigantic impact on, number one, student success, which is the ultimate goal, how classrooms are, the curriculum are designed for those classrooms, and then the outcome measures and these reporting factors that contribute to funding. Excuse me. Okay, so what happens next? Some of you, if not all of you, will be attending the state directors meeting in March. And so what we'd like you to do is to, with your administrator or with another teacher, take a look at Table 4 for your classroom and choose a topic, whether it be attendance or MSG and assessment. Develop a question. For example, what gains are students making? How does it differ by student type, etc.? You see some examples on your screen, and there will be some examples in your handout assignment. So take a look at those, and you're going to do that through Table 4 and identify, what might be behind some of the differences. Are they outliers? Are they data quality problems? What is it? And maybe what other data you need to further complete that analysis. And then what do they mean for classroom improvement? What do your findings mean for classroom improvement? And again, even if you are not attending the face-to-face session in March, we really encourage you to either access or ask for access to your Table 4 and other table data so you can work through this assignment and see what your quality of your data is and what it can tell you about your classroom. This is, again, it's very small, but you have a larger handout in the file pod here. And what Table 4 talks about and what data is collected on Table 4 is measurable skill gain, and that's by entry level. So you'll be able to look at how many people are in your class, how many people, what their attendance hours were for each of the participants, who achieved an ESL gain, who separated before achieving the gain, and who remained within that same level. So you get lots of great information from Table 4. So again, for the face-to-face meeting, or even if you're not attending, take a look at your data. But if you're coming to the face-to-face meeting, please do bring your data tables and your assessment of those tables with you to the March conference, which is going to be on March 7th in Las Vegas. And if you need any assistance as you're taking a look at your data, or if you have any questions, Larry's email as well as my email is included here on the slide, and we'd be happy to talk with you through some of your challenges prior to the session, or again, if you're not coming, just because it is great practice to look at your classroom data in order to make informed database decisions. So I'm going to leave my email and Larry's email up there on the screen. But I want to thank you all for your time and your participation this afternoon. I hope you found the content helpful and useful, and it gave you something to think about as you go back to your classrooms and review your data and make some of those decisions. So we have a few minutes left. The chat is available. If anyone has any questions, please go ahead and put it in the chat pod. Otherwise, I think I will turn it back to Cherise.
All right, Amanda. Perfect. Thank you so much, Amanda. This was a great webinar. I love the opportunity to really dig into the data and look at what it possibly means to me as a teacher. And thank you for allowing us to have this opportunity. Really great job and well done. We are looking forward to seeing you all in Las Vegas on March the 7th, as Amanda shared. And you will have an opportunity to share the investigation into your own data as you have heard. We also look forward to many more opportunities to engage with you around this topic area, but others as well. You'll be receiving a follow-up email following the closing out of this webinar. It will be coming from Winnie Barber, and within that email you'll have several things. One, you will have a link for the actual recording of this webinar so that you can share it with those colleagues who might not have been able to join us today. You will also have the handouts that are at the bottom of this presentation, the handout assignment along with the tables that you were reviewing during the webinar. You'll also have an evaluation link, and that gives you the opportunity to share your feedback with us. Let us know if this is helping you and how it's benefiting you, and what you might want to see in terms of future webinars that we can share with you. And then you will also get the video via a link so that those of you who maybe accessed the webinar by phone and might have had some difficulty with sound, you will be able to view that video on your own at a later time. It is the end of our webinar here, and again I want to thank you all for your time. We appreciate it. We know it's valuable, and we want you to have a great rest of the day. Thank you again, Amanda. Thanks, Winnie, and thank you, Sudi, all of the AAR team who's here, for your work in putting this webinar together. Thanks, and goodbye.